Disclaimer: not everything is 100% accurate. Some dates for certain events are contradictory, even by Tolkien himself, left for interpretation or guess. Some events has been interpreted by myself, such as travel times, from where certain characters traveled, paths, etc. Details of considered not vital has been left out. Some details of found cool has been represented. Part 3 ended just as the battle for Helm's Deep was commencing on March 3. The Ents reached Isengard later that day, and they destroyed Isengard in an all-out assault, and trapped Saruman in the Tower of Orthanc by March 3, the day after they had set out from Fangorn. Meanwhile, Théoden and his men reached the Hornburg. Gandalf reached Isengard and asked Treebeard for help, and he replied that the Horns would help. As Gandalf was on his way back to Helm's Deep, Saruman's army had besieged the Hornburg. On his way back, Gandalf rallied Erkenbrand and the scattered forces from the Second Battle of the Fords of Isen to Helm's Deep. Théoden and Aragorn made a breakout attempt and were driving the enemy out of the deep. Many trees, horns, had moved to block a possible escape route for the orcs. As Gandalf arrived with Erkenbrand and his men, Saruman's army fled into the woods of horns that had appeared behind them and were destroyed. Frodo, Sam and Gollum reached the edge of the desolation of the Morannon. After the battle was over, Théoden, Gandalf and the rest of the company set out from the Hornburg for Isengard. They reached it the next day, on March 5. They had a parley with Saruman, but he would not accept Gandalf's offer of forgiveness. In the confrontation, Grima mistakenly threw a heavy rock at the company below the tower, which was actually the Palantir of Orthanc. Saruman's staff was broken by Gandalf and he was expelled from the Order of the Astari. The Ents held him, and Grima captive in Orthanc. The company set up camp at Dal Baron on their way back to Rohan. Pippin remained curious about the Palantir that Grima threw at them. He stole the Palantir from Gandalf's keeping while he slept, but when he looked into it, he was seen by Sauron, who mistakenly believed that Pippin and the ring were with Saruman in Isengard. Soon after, a Nazgul flew by on its fell beast. Gandalf realized that war was coming soon, and he rode immediately for Minas Tirith, taking Pippin with him for safekeeping. Aragorn used the Orthanc stone to reveal himself and Anduril to Sauron. The following day, the Grey Company found Aragorn near Dal Baron. Halbarad had brought a gift from Arwen, and a message from her. And Elrohir conveyed a message from Elrond to take the paths of the dead. Théoden set out from the Hornburg for Harrowdale, and Aragorn sets out later. Frodo, Sam and Gollum hides inside of the Morannon, and leaves at night. On March 7, Frodo, Sam and Gollum reached the stream of Henneth Anun. As they earlier had reached Carchost, the western Tower of the Teeth, where Frodo had intended to enter Mordor, Gollum persuaded Frodo to follow him to a safer entrance, the Pass of Cirith Ungol. At Henneth Anun, their campfire had attracted the rangers of Ithilien, and Frodo and Sam were captured. Gollum followed them. Their leader, Faramir, considered them spies and questioned Frodo concerning their errand. Sam accidentally revealed that Frodo had the ring, but Faramir denied its lure, and thus gained the trust of the hobbits. As Gandalf and Pippin rode along the White Mountains, through Anorion towards Minas Tirith, they could see the beacons of Minas Tirith were lit, calling for the aid of Rohan. Aragorn and his company reached Dunharrow, with plans to take the paths of the dead. They took a faster route than Théoden's company, who were also on their path to aid Gondor, as advised by Gandalf earlier. On March 8, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli and the Grey Company took the paths of the dead, as Elrond had suggested. Before the door, only Aragorn's strength of will enabled his companions to overcome their fears and enter the paths of the dead. They found a skeleton in the central cavern, which they left behind as Aragorn summoned the dead to follow him. Stumbling onward in the dark, Aragorn and the others emerged from the paths above Eric, where they hurried to the stone. At the Stone of Eric, at midnight, Aragorn unfurled his banner, declared himself the heir of Isildur, and commanded the dead to aid him, and they obeyed. Frodo, Sam and Gollum left Henneth noon and set out for the Morgul Road. The following day, Aragorn and his company set out from Eric, and reached Calombel later that day, as Théoden reached Dunharrow. Gandalf and Pippin reached Minas Tirith, and Faramir and his men left their refuge for Osgiliath, to watch over the defense there. Frodo, Sam and Gollum reached the Morgul Road. At this time, Sauron's darkness became a dreadful reality, as it spread out of Mordor, out west, and covered the lands of the west. It caused despair among the soldiers of Gondor who were fighting Sauron's forces. March 10th. The dawnless day. Due to the storm of Mordor, as the sun rose that day, it could not be seen from Minas Tirith, and the lands remained covered in darkness. Thus the night-eyed orcs of Sauron's armies were freed from their fear of the sun, while the people of Gondor were filled with dread. Aragorn's company continued southward, and crossed the river of Ringlow. King Théoden and his Rohirrim rode from Harrowdale towards Minas Tirith. Frodo, Sam and Gollum passed the crossroads, and saw the Morgul host set forth from Minas Morgul, led by the Witch King. Osgiliath was attacked, and despite the Rangers' defense of the western part of the city, Osgiliath quickly fell to Sauron's forces. Faramir and his men retreated over the Pelennor fields, to report to Denethor, and was almost caught by the Nazgul on their fell beasts, but was saved by Gandalf. An army of orcs from the Morannon takes Caer Andros and passes into Anorion. Frodo, Sam and Gollum reached the top of the winding stair at dawn of March 11th. As Frodo and Sam slept, Gollum visited the great spider Shelob, because he was planning to betray the hobbits to her and then get the ring for himself. When he returned, the hobbits were asleep. He nearly decided not to pursue his plan to recover the ring, when he saw Frodo. However, Sam woke up and spoke harshly to Gollum, and all hope of redemption was lost. Aragorn with the Grey Company and the dead men reached Linhir and crossed into Lebanon. Eastern Rohan was invaded from the north, but was defended by the Ents. In Lothlorien, forces from Dol Guldur swarmed into the forest in a full-scale assault and were held back by the power of the Wood Elves. After Faramir had told his father, Denethor, and Gandalf of what befell in Ithilien, he departed to Osgiliath to supervise the defenses, at his father's bidding. In this venture the host of the Witch King came upon Osgiliath. The following day, Gollum led Frodo and Sam to Shelob's lair. Lebanon was under attack by the corsairs of Umbar, sea raiders and pirates of the haven of Umbar. Aragorn and the army of the dead struck fear into the corsairs, and drove the enemy towards Pelargir, the main harbor of Gondor. As the Witch King arrived at Osgiliath, Faramir had to retreat. He was struck by the Black Breath, which was a weapon used by the Nazgul. The Ringwraith's breath was poisonous and could overpower those affected by it. A small force of knights saved the wounded soldiers from the attack. Théoden and his Rohirrim camped under Min Rimmon, which was the fifth beacon west of Minas Tirith. The Ents overcame the invaders in Rohan. Another day passed, and on March 13th, Frodo got stung by Shelob. Sam saved Frodo from being eaten by her, but thought him dead and took the ring from him, resolving to continue the quest alone. However, Frodo, who was still alive, was captured by orcs and taken to the Tower of Cirith Ungol. That way Sam learned that Frodo was indeed still alive. Faramir was brought back to Minas Tirith badly wounded, as the Pelennor was overrun by the enemies of Gondor. Aragorn and his company finally reached Pelargir, to where they had followed the enemy, causing them to flee or dive into the river Anduin. After manning the black ships with his own troops, Aragorn lifted the curse that followed the dead men since the day of Isildur. As Théoden's army continued on their way to support Minas Tirith, scouts reported a host of orcs west of Amon Din upon the Great West Road and moving toward Théoden's forces. A leader of the Wozes, who lived in the Druadan forest, came forward and offered to lead the riders by secret paths through the forest so they could avoid the orcs. The Wozes led the riders of Rohan across the forgotten road down Stonewain Valley.